This chapter will discuss what teams should and should not do during asset on-site visits. Now that you know how to prepare for an asset visit, we'll talk about what teams do during the visit itself. First of all, you'll want to come prepared, but we've already talked about that. Before the visit begins, the entire team meets for orientation. This is an opportunity for all volunteers and the commission representative to meet and talk about observations, questions, and comments that arose after reading the ACER. During orientation, the team might also discuss a game plan for the visit, and this is an opportunity to get to know your colleagues. It's going to be a busy couple of days. During the orientation, the team will discuss some ethical considerations for the visit, specifically that teams are expected to act with integrity and professionalism. At this time, volunteers will sign the Affirmation of Professionalism and Ethics, an asset document outlining the ethical obligations of teams. First, let's start with shared responsibilities. Remember that teams are on campus to validate that what is written in the ACER is in fact what happens on campus, and that it meets the asset standards. Everyone on the team is responsible for conducting interviews. Interviews are a helpful way to validate the institution's ACER. Each team member will also review files, exhibits provided to the team, and additional documentation provided to the team. When reviewing documentation, it is okay to ask the institution for clarification and additional documentation as needed. Everyone also identifies strengths and weaknesses in their sections. Everyone on the team should stay in constant communication with a commission representative. If you have questions, comments, or concerns, tell the commission representative as soon as you can. And don't forget to document, document, document. We'll talk more about supporting documentation later in the module when we talk about the team report. Finally, everyone also assigns ratings to their specific standards and is responsible for writing their section of the team report. If you have any questions during the visit, always ask the commission representative for help. That's what he or she is there for. Remember, this is a fact-finding mission. The management volunteer reviews standards 1, 2, and 3. These 3 standards cover the strategic and tactical, managerial, and leadership functions of the institution. They also cover the daily operations and human resources aspects of the institution and refunds. The management volunteer typically spends time interviewing the center director and campus leadership, which includes program directors, program managers, and the registrar. The management volunteer may also be the team chair, who helps the commission representative liaise between the team and the institution. If you are a management volunteer, please take the time to review the documents presented on the screen. These are documents that you, as a management volunteer, will review with the institution during the visit and include with the team report. Curriculum review specialists review standards 4, 5, 6, 8, and in most cases, 9A and C. These standards relate to curriculum, learning resources, faculty and staff qualifications, performance measurements, attendance, satisfactory academic progress, and more. Curriculum volunteers have diverse responsibilities. They observe classes, interview faculty and staff and students, and review their program's curriculum. These volunteers also review faculty and staff files. During a class observation, please enter and leave quietly and do not interrupt or take over the class. This is disruptive, and you should plan to interview teachers and students during scheduled breaks only. But we'll talk more about interviewing considerations later in the chapter. A typical classroom observation lasts 20 or so minutes, so plan accordingly. Time flies on an asset visit. When observing classes, curriculum volunteers need to complete Asset Document 19, Instructor Evaluation. Similarly, curriculum volunteers also complete Asset Document 20, Review of Instructional Materials, when reviewing sets of books, workbooks, and other materials included in their program's curriculum. Both documents 19 and 20 will be attached to the report as exhibits. Time management is critical for curriculum volunteers. Remember, asset visits are very busy, and again, time flies. A new addition to Asset On-Site teams is the Completion and Placement Specialist. This volunteer will only accompany teams on visits to selected vocational schools. The Completion and Placement Specialist reviews Standard 9D Completion and Placement. Specifically, he or she reviews placement documentation, speaks with career services staff, and makes job placement verification phone calls. This volunteer will also review Asset Document 28.1 Completion and Placement Statistics, the on-site sampling verification form, in addition to employment placement files. Each PLACE graduate should have a file dedicated to their employment placement. The type of placement, full-time, part-time, etc., impacts the required documentation. All PLACE graduates should have an employment verification form. Some graduates may have chosen to waive placement or even completion. If that is the case, the institution must document it. Other students may have opted for part-time or continuing employment, others for temporary employment, and still others for self-employment. No matter what type of employment, the institution must provide documentation, and the Completion and Placement Specialist must review that documentation. Helpful documents for this standard are the Document 28 series on the Asset website. The Asset Commission Representative reviews Standard 7 and part of Standard 9. To do this, they interview staff and review documents and files, just like the management and curriculum volunteers. The Commission representative's responsibilities may change if the visit is to an avocational institution. If that is the case, the Commission representative will typically review the management standards, although sometimes the Commission representative reviews the curriculum standards. The commission representative also plays an important role in supporting the team members, keeping communication open between the team and the institution, and acting as a liaison between the team and the institution. On site, the commission representative will also organize logistics like transportation and meals. Remember, if you have any questions before, during, or after the visit, feel free to contact the Asset Commission representative. As you may have guessed, asset visits are a lot of work. Everyone on the team is extremely busy. Now that we've talked about the different roles and responsibilities, let's bring it back around to shared responsibilities and talk about interviews. Everyone on the team will conduct interviews during the visit. Interviews with staff, faculty, and students are another way for the team to validate the ACER and help gather critical information for the team report. During interviews with staff and faculty, ask questions about the institution's internal processes, about faculty and staff's backgrounds, and their involvement at the school. When asking questions, use a combination of open-ended and specific questions. One example of an open-ended question might be, what happens during the business planning process? A sample specific follow-up question might be, how often is the business plan reviewed? Approach question asking with a neutral tone. Think peer review, not an interrogation, and be mindful of verbal and non-verbal cues during interviews. Imagine how you would feel if you were being interviewed. And remember, interviewing is a receptive process. During interviews, you should only speak 20 to 30% of the time. The asset team is there to learn about the school from the school. Interviews help the team understand the institution more clearly, clarify details and questions from the ACER, and provide insight into high-level and nitty-gritty details. It is like seeing both the forest and the trees. Interviewing is both an art and a science. It takes time to become comfortable with it. Sometimes on visits, we finish one interview and move on to the next, realizing that we've forgotten to ask a question. It is okay to ask follow-up questions and to go back and forth for more information. Similarly, it is okay and encouraged to ask for supporting documentation and for recent examples. When reviewing files like attendance and refund files, it is okay to ask staff or faculty to help you navigate them. It might be helpful to take a copy of the team report template, Asset Document 9.3, with you in interviews. This is the document that you will receive from the commission representative, and it's the team report outline. Some volunteers and commission representatives might find it helpful to take the 9.3 with them into an interview. That way, you can take notes right where you'll type the report and see if you've forgotten any questions. If you interview faculty and students, it is important to do those interviews during breaks, before or after class, but never during class. Student interviews are a helpful way to gather information and different perspectives on the school and are encouraged, especially if you are a curriculum volunteer. Interviews with students are also a great way to validate things like attendance, grades, and participant satisfaction. Another thing that everyone on the team is responsible for is reviewing documentation. Reviewing documents on site typically means rereading exhibits attached with the ACER, reading additional documents provided on site, like meeting minutes and professional development documents, reviewing staff, faculty, and student files, reviewing attendance and student academic progress documentation, employment placement documentation, and much more. Remember, document, document, document. It applies to the institution too. Reviewing documentation is another way for the team to deepen and diversify the fact-finding mission by triangulating information gathered in the ACER and during interviews. Unfortunately, weaknesses are a normal part of on-site visits. Not every institution has weaknesses in the team report, but if they do, it is important to consider how they are identified and written in the report. If you get to the institution and they do something differently than what is described in the ACER, that might be identified as a weakness. Similarly, if an institution has a policy, procedure, or practice that does not meet the asset standard, that might also be identified as a weakness. When identifying weaknesses, it is important to gather as many details as possible, so always document, document, document. As a volunteer, if you find something during the visit that might be a weakness, tell the commission representative immediately. Together, you and the commission rep can discuss the potential weakness and other documentation to gather or other questions to ask. Details written in the weakness help the institution understand how to respond and help ASSET more clearly understand what the issues are. So it's okay to name names, dates, etc. The more specific, the better. But remember, this information remains confidential within the report. It is also okay to include supporting documentation with the weakness. For example, if an institution gets a weakness for a class observation document that does not include space for notes or signatures, you should include a copy of the document as evidence. Institutions must respond to every weakness, so clarity is key. Just as the team identifies weaknesses, the team also identifies strengths. Strengths are areas in which the institution excels in something beyond what the standard requires and beyond the standard best practice. When writing a strength, specific examples help here too, as does a description of why it's a strength and how it is beneficial to stakeholders. It is okay to provide supporting documentation as needed. If you find a strength, tell the commission representative. As a side note, institutions do not have to reply to a strength the way they must respond to a weakness. Everyone on an asset visit has a specific role with unique responsibilities. We are also part of a team, which means sharing responsibilities as well. As a team, everyone contributes to confirming that what is written in the ACER reflects what happens on campus and that it meets asset standards. In order to do that, we must communicate frequently and openly with the rest of the team, especially when considering strengths or weaknesses. Additionally, we are there to build rapport with the school while remaining neutral and professional. So, any information shared during the visit must be kept confidential. With regard to strengths and weaknesses, there must be a consensus among the team. So as soon as any potential strength or weaknesses are identified, let the commission representative know so the discussion can be opened up to the rest of the team. Don't forget, we are all contributors to the team report, so gather those details and right on. All ratings, strengths and weaknesses alike, must be a consensus agreed upon by the team. This happens during the final team meeting immediately before the exit briefing. The exit briefing is the conclusion of the visit, where the team chair shares the identified strengths and weaknesses with the institution, and the commission representative reviews next steps. We've talked a lot about what to do on visits. Let's cover a short but important list of things not to do on asset visits. In all situations, it is important to remain neutral and composed, and to never act rudely or to be combative toward the institution. Also, we know that there is a lot of information to manage, and it might be tempting to want to record or take photos. Please do not take photos, videos, or voice recordings during on-site visits. Remember, all of the information exchanged is confidential. If you must take something as an exhibit, be sure to let the commission representative and the institution know. The team is there on a fact-gathering mission, which includes reporting any strengths or weaknesses. If the institution receives a weakness, it is up to them to provide a response, so please do not give advice on how to specifically fix the weakness, and especially do not speculate about commission decisions. This is also not a time to provide consulting. Also, it may be tempting, but please do not tell the institution what you do at your school. Lastly, volunteers are just that, volunteers. Please do not use the visit for personal or financial gain. Much of this information is captured in the Affirmation of Professionalism and Ethics, which all team members sign prior to the visit. Remember, we're here as part of the peer review process, and many volunteers are from asset member institutions. Think about how you would want a team to conduct themselves at a visit at your institution. Congratulations! You have completed Chapter 3, which focused on what to do and what not to do during an asset on-site visit. Next step, complete and submit the Chapter 3 quiz found in the Learning module.